Good evening, America, and welcome to your State of the Union edition of Just the News, No Noise. I'm your host, John Solomon, reporting to you, as always, from Washington, D.C. And this week, I'm lucky to have my amazing co-host, Amanda Head, here with us here from Los Angeles. She's joining me in studio. Amanda, an exciting night tonight, as we have exclusively obtained an early copy of the video rebuttal former President Donald Trump has recorded to President Biden's big address tonight. We're going to be giving Real America's Voice viewers an exclusive peek at that later in the show. There are lots of other hot-button topics for Biden to address tonight, and we're lucky to start the show today with Congressman Austin Scott from the great state of Georgia to ask him what he thinks. Amanda, what are you looking for tonight?
Yes, good evening to you, John, and to all of you out there, although America would like him to address the mishandling of classified documents, the record high inflation rate, his son's recent accountability tirade regarding the laptop that he claimed wasn't his for quite a long time. I do suspect that he is going to be forced to touch on the national debt, as it continues to be one of the greatest threats to our future, and I suspect that he could also offer the American people more guidance as to our responsibility and role in the war between Ukraine and Russia. After all, I've been hearing through many social media channels that viewers are concerned that the military equipment that we sent to Ukraine will only be confiscated by our greatest adversaries, like what occurred in Afghanistan during that botched exit. Now, another hot button issue that I could see the president talking about is taking a strange victory lap on tonight regarding his recent declaration that will end the public health emergency currently in place for COVID-19. While this could be mentioned, it will certainly call into question the validity of the student loan debt forgiveness program that his administration will be arguing in favor of in front of the Supreme Court in just 3 weeks. Now, while the White House has estimated that as many as 40 million borrowers will be eligible for some form of forgiveness, at least 170 Republican members of Congress have signed on to an amicus brief arguing against the administration's forgiveness plan. And just as outside groups like the Job Creators Network have chimed in before, a new organization called the Buckeye Institute chimed in to argue that Biden's administration has overstepped its legal authority by creating this program. So is that going to be mentioned tonight? I don't know, John. I guess we'll have to wait and see.
I'm going to guess it's not going to be on the Democratic time of the clock, maybe on the Republicans. You know, this was one of the oddest days leading up to State of the Union I've ever seen in my 30 years here, Amanda. The president's own administration counter-programmed his speech. They announced the largest trade deficit in history. They announced that inflation is going to be sticking around, the Fed chairman said, undercutting what President Biden just said a couple of days ago. They had their border chiefs go up and say the fentanyl crisis really is a result of Joe Biden's policy, and the border is open. And just for good measure, the labor secretary decided this would be a good day to say, I'm bailing out on the administration and going to the greener pastures of the NHL. The Republicans really don't have to counter message at all. They could just let this show go on and they'd probably have a good night. But that's not going to happen. And we are lucky at the start of the show to have one of the most respected members of Congress. He joins us from Georgia, Congressman Austin Scott. Congressman, I want to ask a little bit. Today's been a pretty extraordinary day. Biden was going to put a happy spin on his policies and his alleged successes, but his administration seemed to step on the message all day. Your thoughts?
Oh, I think you summed it up pretty good. You know, I mean, he, his border policy, I mean, there have been somewhere around 5 million people that have come into this country illegally since he's been the president of the United States. To put that in perspective, a congressional district is about 800,000 people, you know, so if you run those numbers, you know, that's several congressional districts that he has allowed to come into the country illegally. And if you turn around and you look at what some of the metropolitan areas are talking about doing, which is allowing people who are not U.S. citizens to vote, we're going to counteract that with regard to Washington, D.C., I think this week. But literally the way some of these laws are being drafted, you were going to let the representatives of the Chinese government vote. And look what China did to us just this past week, which was no surprise to those of us on the Armed Services Committee. But he's going to talk a lot about, inflation. I'm sure he'll challenge Republicans on us trying to get reasonable spending reductions on the national debt. And John and Amanda, again, you know, the two pieces of legislation that he passed without a single Republican vote, what he calls the American Rescue Plan and the Inflation Reduction Act, those two pieces of legislation spent $3 trillion. $3 trillion. That's 10%, right at 10% of the national debt. And had they not spent that $3 trillion, you would not need a debt limit increase. And again, they spent that money without a single Republican vote on those two pieces of legislation. So, he's going to talk about a lot of things. He's going to talk about bipartisanship. I'll tell you, I'm in my 13th year as a member of Congress. I met Joe Biden at a White House Christmas party under the Obama-Biden administration many years ago. Have never had a policy discussion with him, as most Republicans in the House have. And so, it's what Joe says versus what Joe does. And, it shouldn't surprise us when he ran as the moderate in the campaign for president in the Democratic primary. And then if you look how he governs, he's extremely far to the left, even of President Obama.
Yeah, it's incredible to see. And, not only these issues that you brought up today as counter-programming for his State of the Union speech, but as you cited, Congressman, this past week, there are lots of jokes to be made about hot air that's going to be present in that chamber tonight, but the hot air that was inside of that balloon from China. And it's unfortunate timing for President Biden because it brings back to the forefront of the conversation the issues that we have as far as intelligence with China, but also his relationship and past business dealings allegedly with members of the CCP, and not just him, his family, his brother, his son, of course. What do you expect to hear him say? Do you think he'll address China at all?
Oh, I think he's going to talk about how aggressive he was in taking down the balloon. But Amanda, let's be clear about this. Had it not been for citizens of the United States spotting that balloon, it would not have been reported in the press. And had it not been reported in the press, I do not think the president would have taken action in taking the balloon down. I think he would have just let it fly over and pretend that it never happened. The good thing about Americans seeing this is now it's in front of us. It's not just something other people are talking about, that the Chinese are spying on us. And so they've moved from being over 20 years ago, what I would consider an aggressive industrial competitor to an adversary. The thing that we've got to have now, John and Amanda, is corporate America step up and recognize that by continuing to manufacture in China, moving jobs out of America into that country, they are actually doing a lot of damage to our future as a country and to our citizens. And so those countries that are bringing so much in from China, we need them to be either multi-sourcing or dual sourcing, hopefully bringing as much of that workforce as they can back to the United States. But if they can't bring it back to the United States, move it to Vietnam, move it to Malaysia, at least move it to somebody that's not our enemy.
Yeah, so true. China proofing the economy. Seems like Democrats are warming up and joining Republicans, kind of ignoring the president, joining in on that. I want to ask a little bit, you're on the House Intelligence Committee. Do you have any inkling yet how long these Chinese balloons might have been floating through our space? The NORAD commander said several of them over several years, and his own team failed to detect them. That's what he announced at the Pentagon yesterday. Any sense of how long this was going on and how big an intelligence security failure may have been at work here?
Yeah, I won't speak to the issue of the balloons as a whole. What I will tell you is that for years, China, the Communist Chinese Party, has been stealing the intellectual property of the United States of America. Sometimes it's our property, sometimes it is corporate America's property, but they have been stealing our intellectual property. They then take that and they use it to compete with us, sometimes in a national security area and other times in an economic area. And so when you look at what's happening in this country with corporate America importing so much from China, they're actually doing a tremendous disservice to the United States. I mean, we're literally giving our adversaries the dollars that they need to carry out actions against us as the citizens of the United States. And so the thing that I think is real good about this past week, number one, it was an American citizen that saw the balloon. They reported it, and once the press started reporting it, the president then took action. Had we not had a U.S. citizen report it, I do not think the president would have taken action against that balloon. But everybody in this country, everybody sitting on a corporate board, has got to acknowledge that China is spying on the United States of America, its citizens, and is an adversary of our country and our people. And so stop doing business with China.
Yeah. It seems
message.
so rudimentary, but for some reason we've gotten ourselves into this mess, and that mess unfortunately contributes to so many other issues. And whenever we have you on, we always try to talk to you about supply chain crisis, the issue with food, and I think it was World Food Program last year said close to 50 million people were on the brink of famine. I know there's not a quick fix, but regarding how it affects us in particular, not necessarily globally, but the U.S., what are some of those fixes we can employ to try to alleviate the issue?
Yes, so the Ukraine exported 50 million metric tons of corn and wheat on an annual basis. The vast majority of that went through the Black Sea. The issue that has got to happen inside the United States of America, number one, we've got to have support for production agriculture. If you look at the systems that are set up and in place to help protect our producers in the event of an economic collapse of commodity prices, they were set when fertilizer costs a third of what it does, when fuel costs a third of what it does, and so the cost that a farmer has in the actual production of corn and peanuts and wheat and the other things that we take for granted are going to be on the grocery store shelf when we walk in there, the actual production costs of those are significantly higher than any of our support prices are set at. And so as we write the farm bill, we're going to have to make sure that the support prices in the event of a collapse of a commodity price are pushed to reflect closer to the actual input cost today versus what they would have been just a few years ago. That's something that we've got to make sure we do, because if you're not farming today, you're not going to be farming 3, 5, 10 years from now. And one of the great challenges we're going to have with the food supply in this country is who's going to actually grow it. I mean, we need the family-owned farms in this country to be the ones that are taking care of us as the citizens and growing our food supply. We don't need corporate-run farms in this country. So that's one of the things we'll be dealing with when we write the farm bill. Now, what we're worried about short term is where do we get the inputs from? You got companies like ChemChina, you got companies like Syngenta Seed that's owned by the Chinese.
Right.
A lot of the things that we depend on to actually grow that food, China has embedded themselves in the supply chain of the chemicals that we need and the seed supply that we need, and we've got to break our dependence on them.
Yeah, Congressman, you've been a clarion voice on that, and people are starting to catch on. It's a great honor to have you on tonight. We'll be watching at the State of the Union. Folks, we're going to take a quick commercial break. We'll be right back with the former acting Attorney General of the United States.